If you're interested in politics, if you're interested in negotiation, you probably know who Joe Manchin is. He's the guy who has stood in the way of Democrats' efforts to pass the Build Back Better agenda or get rid of the filibuster. And most recently, there's been this kind of on again, off again, then on again negotiation involving Biden's agenda on climate and taxes and energy.
You have been hypercritical of Joe Manchin. You actually called him not a real Democrat at one point. Does this change your assessment?
If we can get this done, it will be a massive step forward for the American people.
For those of you who support Joe Biden and the Democrats' agenda on these issues, you probably find Joe Manchin to be maddening and confusing and frustrating, and you're thinking, what is going on with this guy? You know, just a few weeks ago, he cuts off negotiations with the Democrats, essentially killing any chance of the rest of President Biden's domestic agenda to pass the Senate. Then there's this really nasty barrage that comes from Democrats across the political spectrum, right? They call Senator Joe Manchin one of their own, a bad faith negotiator, a difficult bargainer. Then this past Thursday, out of the blue, Manchin and Democratic leader Schumer suddenly surprised everybody by announcing a sweeping climate, energy, and tax deal, the largest of its kind in the history of the American Republic.
I spoke with both Senator Schumer and Manchin and offered my support for a historic agreement. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Some of you will see a lot of similarities between the beginning of the Build Back Better initiative.
You know, at the time I'm recording this, nothing has been signed, sealed, or delivered, and given my own experience in negotiations involving Joe Manchin, I'm averse to calling this a done deal. So today, I'm going to look at the question of who is Joe Manchin as a negotiator? Is he an irrational, erratic, self-absorbed, difficult negotiator? And is there something we as negotiators generally can learn about how to negotiate with someone who, like him, can sometimes be a pivotal deal maker and sometimes be a total spoiler? And you know what? Even if you're not interested in the Senate negotiations between Senator Manchin and his fellow Democrats, stick around because in this video, you'll be getting advice on how to negotiate with anyone who at times can use difficult negotiation tactics or hard bargaining behaviors. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School. I'm the founder and former director of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, and I have lots to say about dealing with difficult negotiators. So let me just say up front that my analysis here of Senator Joe Manchin as a negotiator is not based on any inside knowledge, but rather on press reports both over the past few weeks and over the last few years as Democrats have tried hard to negotiate with him since he's the swing vote in the Senate. I have heard many people call Senator Joe Manchin a difficult negotiator or a problem or a host of other bad names that frankly are inappropriate for my PG-13 themed videos. This is not a good way to succeed. In fact, you are hurting the effort rather than helping it. And here's why. Labeling someone as inherently difficult or as inherently a problem tends to actually undermine your ability to influence them and frankly isn't really fair or appropriate, right? I believe that people engage in difficult negotiation behaviors or might use hard bargaining tactics, but the notion that someone is inherently, as part of their nature, difficult feels a bit dehumanizing and frankly just isn't helpful. And here's why. In negotiation, you always want to be thinking about what role are you giving the other side? Because in negotiation, you're trying to influence or persuade the other side. And so when you give them the role of problem, difficult person, spoiler, it's a role that nobody wants. So really good negotiators actually give their counterparties, even their counterparties who use hard bargaining behaviors, a positive role, a desirable role. So people like to be in the role of helper or deal maker or cake player. So when Democrats decry and criticize Manchin, they end up doing themselves a disservice, right? They're not making it more likely that he wants to play ball with them because giving him a bad role increases the likelihood that they will actually push back against that role. So I always want to frame a negotiation as, Senator Manchin, you disagree with this. Help me understand why. Give me the kinds of things you would say yes to. share with me your wisdom on what would be better. All of those are much more positive roles. Now, a second problem here has that there's been this framing that Senator Manchin is crazy in some way or irrational in some way. And what I want to say is that really good negotiators actually put themselves in the shoes of the person that they think of as being crazy or irrational. Because the more we can envision what their world looks like, the more sympathetic we're likely to be, and the easier it's going to be for us to actually influence them. So let's think about this with respect to Manchin, right? I think there's actually a much more sympathetic story to tell about the way he's been behaving in many of these negotiations. Consider, he is a Democratic senator in a southern state. In fact, he's the last standing Democratic senator in a solidly Republican state. The threat for him in terms of his reelection is not that some Democrat to the left of him is going to unseat him. The threat is that a Republican is going to unseat him. And so if you're Senator Manchin, you cannot act as if this does not matter. And so when Senator Manchin is standing in the way of a more progressive agenda, at least part of that is because he has to consider what does he need to do to retain his seat in the United States Senate. And so in a negotiation, whenever I'm experiencing that other person is acting in irrational ways, I want to think about, if I were sitting in their shoes, how might I be thinking about it? And the truth of the matter is, he is in a tough situation here. Because on the one hand, he is a Democrat. On the other hand, he has to retain his seat. Next really important piece of advice here, and I think this is one that sometimes some Democrats have ignored, and that is this. When someone tells you in a negotiation that something is a core value of theirs, don't always think it's strategic. Actually, sometimes you really need to believe them. So for example, Senator Manchin has over and over again said that he really believes that for our democracy to work, we have to work across party lines.
In a statement yesterday, Manchin wrote in part, "This bill will cut the inflation taxes Americans are paying, lower the cost of health insurance and prescription drugs, and ensure our country invests in the energy security and climate change solutions we need to remain a global superpower through innovation rather than elimination." He went on, "It is time to put away the partisan swords and advance legislation that is in the best interest of the future of this nation and the American people we all represent, not just one party."
Now, it is true that in the current polarized state of our politics, with a Republican Party that largely is uninterested in working across the political aisle, we can think of Manchin as naive, as ridiculous, as somehow reminiscent of some day that has come and gone. On the other hand, if we don't take him at his word, we will find ourselves in trouble, right? And the fact of the matter is, if you think about something like voter reform, right? He opposed the For the People Act, but he is actually not opposed to advancing voting rights. And in fact, he has put forward compromise legislation. And so what that means, right, is that when I am thinking about how do I negotiate with someone who is really difficult, or we think of as at least using difficult behaviors, I need to give them something that is yesable. I need to help build a golden bridge that allows them to have a win, to show that they're being loyal to their core values, not as somehow backing them into a corner and forcing them into an undesirable choice. And so when we shame Senator Manchin, the role we give him is negative. But is there a way to build a golden bridge that makes it very yesable for him, right? I think the answer is yes. And at least as of this recording, I think we see that having happened in these climate, energy, and tax negotiations. I think Senator Schumer has been really successful here because if we look at least what we know right now of the deal that has been struck between Manchin and Schumer, we see a few things. One is Manchin has been able to preserve some fossil fuel protections that are really important for his home state. Two, he has been shown that the tax impact will actually not hurt the inflation question that is really important to him. In fact, it will help address inflation. Three, to the degree that in order to retain his seat in the Senate, he has to be able to show the citizens of West Virginia that he is an independent-minded thinker, that he is a maverick in some way. This result has shown that, right? He was willing to stand against his party. He's been able to win some concessions. This is very yesable now for Senator Manchin. I appreciate that at least some people will say, well, this is giving in to kind of Manchin in a way that will encourage more spoiler behavior. But if we take a look at literature around negotiation spoilers or negotiation holdouts, we can broadly say that there are different kinds of spoilers, right? One kind of a spoiler is somebody who's prepared to trash any result, right? They do not want an agreement. Those people are called total spoilers. But another kind of spoiler, and I think this is the kind of spoiler that sometimes Senator Manchin is something called a limited spoiler. Somebody who will spoil a negotiation if his or her interests are not met. But once they are met, they're willing to say yes. And we have evidence that Manchin is much more of a limited spoiler and not a total spoiler. And so in this case, given the slim majority that the Democrats have, that is to say, they need Manchin's vote, right? There's no way around this. If we want to achieve some deal, the only way Democrats can do it is by understanding what is needed for Manchin to say yes. And so the final piece of advice I want to share here is that when you're negotiating with someone who can come across as challenging or difficult or erratic, you don't want to play their game back. Instead, you want to change the game. So if you really take a look at what happened in the beginning of these negotiations, Senator Schumer took a more hardball approach. And what happened, right, is Manchin walks.
I'm really not going to talk about Build Back Better anymore because I think I've been very clear on that. There is no negotiations going on at this time.
But then a few days later, when the parties come back, Schumer has a different stance, right? He's more willing to accede to the specific needs that Manchin has. This allows Senator Manchin to craft a story where he's not a spoiler, but a kingmaker. Good role. It allows Manchin to get on board. In doing so, Manchin can say to the Democrats, I saved Biden's agenda. He can say to the Democrats, I helped the Senate bring about a key piece of legislation. And he could say to his constituency, I got something done to protect you in this state around fossil fuel that no Republican could have done, because no Republican could have cut this deal with Schumer. So the lessons here are key. First, when dealing with a negotiator who seems difficult to you, avoid labeling them as a difficult person. Distinguish difficult people from difficult behaviors. 2, in a negotiation, always give the other side a good role. No one wants to be cast as the problem, as stupid, as irrational. Instead, we want to be cast as a helper, an advisor, someone who could really find the way for us to get to yes. 3rd, even with the people you think are most difficult, most crazy, most irrational, put yourself in their shoes, right? Behaviors that we think seem irrational or crazy to us, often when we put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, we can at least see some reason why they're acting the way they're acting, and that gives us insight on how to shift their viewpoint. 4th, when someone keeps on repeating something that matters to them, that it's a core value, believe them. And if you're going to succeed with them, you're going to have to meet that core value. And 5th and finally, always try to build a bridge, a golden bridge for the other side. If they are a limited holdout or spoiler and you build that golden bridge, you can induce them to say yes and yield a win. Now, truth of the matter is, right, only time is going to tell if the Democrats will be able to pass sweeping legislation on these issues of climate, taxes, and energy. But we know that if they do so in this Congress, it will only happen with the support of Senator Joe Manchin. So if you want to hear another really great story of negotiating a yes with a challenging negotiating counterparty, keep watching this next video on how U.S. women's soccer negotiated an equal pay arrangement with the U.S. Soccer Association. Okay, if you like this video, I'd be super grateful if you would hit like, ring the bell, and definitely subscribe to this wicked cool channel. Okay, you know you want to hear this wicked cool story on equal pay and women's soccer, so keep on watching.